everybody, it's Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, and welcome to the feature interview for our August issue. It's with saxophonist Mark Colby. Mark, thanks for being on the feature interview show here.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. It's nice to be here.
I know we've been talking about this for quite a long time, and now that we're on a monthly schedule, it's allowing me to get more artists in, and especially artists that I have wanted to have on for a very long time, which would be you.
Cool.
So why don't we just start a little bit? You know, Mark's a saxophonist. He teaches all over the Chicagoland area, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen him performing at Jazz Showcase, Green Mill, everywhere under the sun. However, I think a lot of you probably don't know his history and all of the unbelievable things that he has done. But why don't we start first off, how did you first get into music? Now, you grew up in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, my dad was a professional musician.
Okay.
And he was a drummer and a vibraphonist. And so I grew up with music around me in the house all the time. I was listening to, in the late 50s, I was listening to Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw and, Tommy Dorsey and all of that, because he came from that era.
Okay, sure.
So about the time I was 8 years old, he brought home a clarinet one day and decided that I was going to take lessons.
Oh, he just, that's it. You didn't have to go through any process. This is what you're playing. Here you go.
Right, and he was a very smart guy because he didn't have me take up the drums.
I was going to say, there's drums in the house and you're playing clarinet.
Thanks, Pop.
Well, actually, at the end of a gig, you win.
I was the first one out the door.
Exactly. So you started playing clarinet. Did you play in the school bands?
I did. Sure, I did. I did all of that. Starting in middle school, I played clarinet in the concert band. I played clarinet in the orchestra. I played in the stage band because we didn't use jazz. That word wasn't in common use.
Right. Yeah.
Back, in the early '60s. So, stage band. That legitimized it.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly.
And as a matter of fact, I'll tell you another story.
Well, with the stage band thing, I mean, what kind of tunes are you playing? You're playing big band charts,
sure,
probably, right?
Playing Glenn Miller charts and Tommy Dorsey, all that stuff, standard,
I mean, how did you? It's always fascinating to me because I've seen kids that start when they're in 5th grade, 6th grade, playing clarinet or saxophone or trumpet or anything like that. But then to throw them into the fire and have them start playing big band tunes and actually have it swing, that's a whole different ball game. Do you think it's because you listened that it gave you that concept?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That was exactly what it was. I absorbed so much of that music from listening to it so much. It took me a couple of years, after I started playing clarinet to connect the idea that, listening to Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw, and I'm playing the same instrument that they are, and something clicked, and I started to play along with the records.
Well, now we're going to jump around a little bit because as we're talking, it's always interesting to me because I want to get your take on this as an educator, and you have kids come in probably all different levels, all different, everything. And can you tell, like, if somebody is, let's say you tell them, go home and listen to this, go home and listen to that, and come back in and play something? I mean, can you tell if they're actually doing that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, how important is
either
that?
Either that, or they're not really absorbing it. They're they're listening to some particle of it, but not. They're not embracing it.
And that to me, because kind of going through all the different interviews that I've done, and even with myself, listening so much. When you sit down to start playing those tunes in the big band charts or anything like that, it's a natural feel suddenly, right? You're not thinking too much.
That's right.
And that's where you were when you were young.
When I was very young, I always played the jazz tenor chair, and I was the first chair clarinet player in the band because I had good teaching, but I had that environment where I was hearing that stuff.
Now, we're talking let's talk about in the 50s, right? As you're growing up, who were you listening to? Like, who were the sax players that you were listening to that you would glom onto?
I would say that up until about 1959 or 1960, I listened mostly to clarinet players. And then I got the itch to play saxophone. My dad got me an alto. And I had that for about 6 months, and I realized that the alto was not the sound that I was hearing. It was the tenor.
Tenor.
Because by that time, my sister had a whole mess of modern jazz records. Miles and Horace Silver and Art Blakey
Yeah.
and Coltrane and Wayne Shorter and, you know, the whole
Yeah.
thing. And I started hearing that and I said, I want some of that. You know, so my dad, very patiently with me, we took the alto in, we exchanged it for, you know, financially comparable
Sure.
tenor. It was old and everything, but it was a tenor, and
Yeah.
I just didn't care. That was it.
So that was the sound. That's the sound
That's
that you
the
felt.
sound. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm a B flat kind of guy.
So after high school, well, you moved, didn't you move? You moved
Yeah,
down to Miami?
My folks decided to move down to Miami because that's like the Jewish cycle of life. You grow up in New York and then you go to Miami.
Miami.
I want to go to Miami, you know. So anyway, it did that, and actually it turned out to be a fantastic experience. I don't know. That's where I started doing my serious playing. I started doing gigs, you know, little sock hops and dances and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff when I was 14, you know, years
Wow.
old. And I, you know, man, I made $7.50 for that night. This was 1963, 64.
Yeah, and you're 14.
You know, I don't know. 14, yeah. They had to come pick me up, you know, because those guys are older.
Yeah.
And they did, and you know, I mean, I knew that music, that was it.
Yeah.
That was it for me. I was fully committed to doing it.
So what was your regimen like? I mean, were you learning tunes back then? I mean, when you're 14, a lot of kids are playing soccer and football and everything else. And
Yeah, you know, I did. I played baseball. I played in the
Okay.
little leagues and the pony leagues. I loved baseball, but unfortunately, I was only 5'4", and I knew that there was no future there. So you know, I practiced a lot.
Yeah.
I practiced a lot, and I listened a lot, and I had the right kind of, you know, concept
Yeah.
for being able to play a lot of that music. Now, also with all of that, you know, pop music was starting to come up too. So I was there for, you know, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones,
Right.
and you know.
Did you glom onto that too, like you did with the jazz, or not quite?
Not quite. It took me a little while to, you know, to warm up
Yeah.
to it, you know. But once I did, yeah, I mean, I love pop music, and I played with a lot of, you know, great pop acts and, you know, all of that. So it was a great experience, and it really helped prepare me for studio work.
Well, you know, you're in that generation that bridged both gaps, but you had that background in.
Huh? What'd you say? That generation.
Well, you know what I mean. You're not that old.
No, thank you. Thank you.
But you bridged both gaps where you actually came up influenced not by any rock and roll or anything. You were influenced by jazz.
I was.
And then you made the switch over to rock and roll, which started taking everything over. But, you know, some people would say, I'm not doing that. And they were hardcore and they were stuck on one side.
Right.
But I know that you went on both sides, to the rock and to the R&B and everything like that. And I would assume you loved both sides of that. And it must have been
Yeah.
right around that time, right? Right around 14, 15, 16 when things started kind of going.
Yeah, you know, and then, you know, fusion was starting, you know.
Yeah.
Miles, of course, and Herbie and Chick. And,
Yeah.
You know, I got heavy into that. You know, it was a wonderful experience.
Well, now you went to Miami then, so you just
I
stayed
did.
there. You went to the University
Yeah,
of Miami.
I wound up. I got a full scholarship to the University of Miami
and back then, that was
On
really
clarinet.
happening. Oh, on clarinet.
because they weren't giving scholarships on saxophone. The saxophone was still a bastardized instrument in 1967. This is 1967.
Wow.
I mean, we're going back to 1967, right? These
Right,
days.
yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So anyway, I got the scholarship on clarinet, but Jerry Coker was at the head of the program, jazz program.
Yeah.
There, and you know, Whit Seidner was there, and Vince Maggio was there. Anyway, make a long story short, you know, I was in the jazz band first semester, you know, top jazz band, and they just switched my scholarship over to saxophone.
Oh, they did?
They it kind of opened up the.
So what did
doors.
they gave it to you on clarinet, but it was still in the jazz
Yeah,
program?
when I first went to the school, it was a clarinet scholarship, which, you know, was the same. It was a full scholarship,
Yeah.
covered everything.
Yeah.
You know, and then it went to saxophone performance.
I just know that some schools back then, and even back in the mid '90s, there was no such thing as like a jazz studies program. You'd go in as a classical player, and then you'd have to figure it out on your own, right?
Well, Jerry Coker started the program at Indiana University, and David Baker wound up taking it when Jerry took the job at the University of Miami.
Okay.
So they kind of did a little, but those two guys are the fathers of jazz education.
Yeah.
In this country, and then University of Miami started their jazz program in '66, the year before I got there.
Oh, okay.
So
it's kind of revolutionary
stuff.
This
was new,
Yeah.
And like there was a lot of condescension about the fact that what are we doing, letting these illegitimate people come in here and this is the land of Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart, and
right,
and all that, and they still don't handle it well. I'll be honest with you. I had an experience at a university that I won't name, but I taught there for 31 years. Where that went on.
Well, a lot of them. I don't know about now, but I know 10, 15 years ago that there was a lot of universities where the classical department would fight with the jazz department because that's not legitimate music. This is legitimate music.
Right.
And to me, in the late '60s, that's unbelievable. But that they were starting the jazz programs down there, along with all of the other things politically and socially and everything that was happening. It was almost like they were letting a bunch of crazy hippies into the school and giving them degrees, I'm sure is how they were thinking about it, right?
Yeah. That works. It's a lot better now in most places.
Sure.
I would say.
Sure.
Most places.
Now, when you're down there, and it seems like it's a brand new curriculum, were they kind of adjusting things as you were down there, saying, "Hey,
yes,
why don't
absolutely.
you do this?" Or
the curriculum was always being discussed, and some things changed, and all of that went on for a long time down there, and it was very successful. That program was the model. Even more so than North Texas State, I think, at that time. This is we're talking about the late '60s and '70s.
Yeah.
We had people down there like Pat Metheny, Jaco Pastorius. We had the band, the Dixie Dregs, Steve Morse on guitar, and Rod Morgenstern on
Rod Morgenstern. Yep.
I can't think of everybody's name, but we had an incredible, almost like a Nova at that time with the amount of talent that was there. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's like a creative melting pot.
Yeah, and it happened, like I said, it just happened all together within a couple of years.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And then everything exploded.
Well, and that stuff, it's interesting because every once in a while that'll happen, and you were in the middle of that, which is amazing.
I was very fortunate.
When you were in college, I would assume you were starting to play professionally and starting to play gigs out and doing things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was playing in bands on Miami Beach, backing up Sammy Davis and
all the hotels
Tony
were
Bennett,
down there.
all the hotel.
Right?
We went from one hotel to the next hotel, or you would work a series of gigs at a particular hotel. But there was a lot of.
So you must
work.
have been making tons of connections.
I made a ton of connections, and at that time I was a young guy, and I was making a nice living.
Yeah.
I had an apartment on Miami Beach, a block from the beach, and I was, it was fun. It was.
But I think that's one of those important times, and that's one of the things that isn't happening as much these days. Well, none of those gigs are, but as far as the connection goes,
right?
Because it's one thing you go to school these days and you're there and you meet your teachers and you see the artists in residence come in and some clinicians, you get to know them and they'll remember your name. But you're talking about every night you're in a club and you're meeting Sammy Davis and Tony Bennett, but you're also probably meeting their managers, the A&R guys. Everybody's there, celebrities and all, and they're seeing you, and you're getting comfortable in that scene.
Yeah, exactly. And you would meet, some of the guys that these acts would bring. They'd bring, a rhythm section. They'd bring a saxophone player, a trumpet player, the whole conductor, pianist, or whatever. And you get to meet those guys, and yeah, it was the same thing. I ran into a bunch of guys later after all those years, that it was great to see again.
Yeah.
And every kind of acting you can imagine. I mean, those guys, but I mean, there was the Temptations and the Four Tops. I mean, you went to the Motown thing and all the comics.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know.
They used to have bands opening up for them, or bands in the pit, right?
I'll tell you, a guy that's a real mensch is Bob Newhart.
Yeah.
Bob Newhart doesn't need a band.
Really?
But he makes whoever, the promoter or whatever, hire a full big band. They play them on, and then they play them off. And they get paid for the whole thing.
Yeah.
Including rehearsal.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are some guys, Frank Sinatra was great to musicians. Frank Sinatra Jr. was great to musicians.
Yeah.
Certain people, not all of them.
Right. But those guys, I mean, when we're getting into talking about entertainers like that, I mean, those guys came up through the ranks somewhat
of
too.
course.
So they knew what was
Yes.
going on before they got to the certain point, right?
Yeah, I mean, and they appreciated, when the bands were good, they were happy as heck.
Oh, yeah.
And, if there was something that was not happening, you'd see guys not be there for the next,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so when you're playing all these clubs and all that stuff, and all of the theaters and the hotels, and you're getting all this experience, what was like that one? Was there a one gig or one experience that all of a sudden it's like you're either, you're playing jazz or you're yourself at that point? You know what I mean? Like you're Mark Colby, they're hiring you because you're Mark Colby, as opposed to bringing you in to do sideman work everywhere.
Right. It was probably when I went out with Maynard.
Okay.
Maynard Ferguson in 1975.
How'd you get that gig?
I got that gig by pure happenstance. Danny Gottlieb, a marvelous drummer, played with Pat Metheny and everything. Danny was the drummer in the University of Miami Concert Jazz Band, and he had sent tapes of the band to, I don't know, Kenton's band, Maynard's band, Woody's band, whatever, and in case they ever needed a drummer,
right?
And but what happened was, at the time, all of a sudden, the tenor player, and I think it was Mike's, I think it was Mark Smith. He was one of the English guys from Maynard's band. He left. So it was like, we got we need a tenor player, and it just so happened that they had listened to the tape that Danny had sent, and they liked.
There's
the
a
tape,
tenor player right there.
Yeah, and I had, and they said, why don't you call that guy?
No kidding.
It was as simple as that.
Was it like, hey, do you want to do this gig? Yeah. You have to be here at a certain time, and here we go.
Yes, I mean, when they called me on a Sunday night, and believe it or not, I had just watched a PBS special on Maynard. It was called Maynard Ferguson at the Top. It was a club in Rochester, which I wound up playing later, and it was with the English band that he had, English and a couple of Australians. And, the music to me was kind of a little jivey, and, I mean, I was listening to Wayne and Joe Henderson and, Sonny and whatever, and, I was not terribly impressed, so help me God. I got the call right after that saying, would you be interested in doing this? You need to be in New York on Tuesday. We rehearse Wednesday morning.
Well, at least you got a rehearsal before you're playing at the show.
Yeah, so I said, I was like befuddled. Do I really want to go out with this band? Because I don't know what it's like. But I always wanted to go out with a name band and travel and see the world. And I was single at the time. Perfect opportunity.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I called him back. It took me about 15 minutes. I called him back and I said, sure. So I flew to New York on Tuesday night. We had the rehearsal Wednesday, and our first gig was on Thursday.
Yep. Wow.
And then the first gig was at a club in Baltimore. Yeah, so the second night we played in Atlantic City at the Convention Center, and we're playing opposite Buddy Rich, and we're playing opposite Stan Kenton's band.
Oh, man.
Okay, and First of all, the rehearsal went really good, and the gig in Baltimore at this club went really good. So everybody was like, "Ooh."
Yeah, this is great.
So, we went the next night and we kicked some ass. And the third night was the kicker, because third night on a band, played Carnegie Hall as part of the Newport Jazz Festival.
Oh, jeez.
And Bill Watrous' Wildlife Refuge big band opened for us. And, that was my introduction.
Yeah.
To
So
being
on
out
Sunday
the
you were in
road.
your living room.
And Sunday Tuesday I was in night, and it was in New York, and
Oh my God.
and then it went, and it turned out that even the show that I heard, I mean, there were some things that were not up my alley, but there was a lot of stuff that we did that you wouldn't see unless you came to a live gig.
Yeah.
We had bebop, frantic tunes. I had a ballad feature. I played on a funk tune. I mean, I was like a jack in the box. Because we only had 3 saxophones, so alto, tenor, and baritone.
Right.
And I got the majority of the solos on tenor and soprano.
Well, and it wasn't the one thing with Maynard's bands. I mean, I saw him later, obviously, in the 90s, but one of the things with Maynard's bands is that lots of energy, lots of playing, hard driving stuff, funk, rock, maybe one ballad in a set or something like that, but otherwise, I mean, you're blowing, you're throwing
It
down,
was a
right?
very high energy band.
Yeah.
I mean, we were all young and full of gunk, and John Wilson wrote a review of us at Buddy Rich's club that said, listening to this band is something akin to taking amphetamines.
Sounds about right?
And it was right. God bless you, Maynard.
Now, you were on the band for how many years?
It was close to 3.
But I mean, he's doing a lot of one-nighters, right? There isn't like a lot of
No.
downtime. with him,
There
right?
there were very few places where we played more than.
I mean, that's a long 3 years, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, on a bus.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like the cool bus that he had later, when the band got shrunk even more.
Right.
They had sleepers and all of that.
Right.
So we're sleeping in,
Just the bus seats.
Yeah, in a fetal position or hanging out with your legs out.
Oh, man.
But you know what? Like I said, I mean, for the most, everybody was up for playing.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's energy, no matter how tired we were, we get up there and there'd be thousands of people out there.
Yeah.
This was their opportunity to see and hear the band, and and we tried to give 110% every night.
I think kicking back to some of the jazz education stuff too is that's something you can't teach kids.
No.
To play with intensity like that
No.
every single night.
No, I can't teach them to play intense enough.
Right.
Doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
They all come in and they got these little tiny sounds, and you got to roar.
Right.
I mean, it's a lot of work to get some of those guys going. But I got, I've had some incredible students over the years that are out there doing great things.
Well, and that's the thing that I don't think a lot of people understand is that you can play. You're playing at your college. Maybe you're playing at a club around town. Then you get comfortable with it, and it is what it is. But I mean, when you're on one of those bands, and you've been on a lot of them, where it's like if you play like that, you're not on the band anymore because they don't want you there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's got to be so difficult even to be able to explain that to somebody until they experience it.
Right.
So to have that experience had to be like earth changing, right? I mean, that was it.
Yeah. It wasn't until later that I started to mature. So and I wasn't interested in how fast it was or how intense it. I mean, I wanted to explore other things, other dynamics and tendencies to play music that a lot of people don't do anymore. Very few people play subtly. Very few people know how to play ballads.
Right.
Very few people know how to sing a melody, as if you were a vocalist and not, some guy who's choking up, the words and stuff,
Yeah.
And that's another thing. I mean, listening is such an important part of teaching.
Yeah.
And I can't emphasize that enough to the students. If you don't listen all the things I'm having you work on and I'm telling you about will not amount to a hill of beans unless you understand the correlation about why you're practicing this. You know, it's to make you a more complete musician.
How important do you think it is for students? And I don't want to get completely off because I know we're talking about Maynard here, and then we're going on. But
Yeah.
how important is it that you think that students listen to the standards and the standards that those standards came from? You know, like keep
Right.
going back in time so you understand the timeline of jazz. That's got to be
Yes, and I do. I think it's
Yeah.
really important to go as far back as you can. I'm talking about going back to Louis Armstrong. You know, and if you listen to Louis Armstrong today, first of all, there's nobody that sounds happier
that's right.
playing music than that cat. You know, that music is joyous.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't make you move something, then you're dead.
Right.
You know, it evokes a response. You know, and you know, you work your way through, whether it's Dizzy or if it's Sidney Bechet, and then you move to Coleman Hawkins, and then you move to Ben Webster, and then you move to Lester Young,
Yep.
and you know, on and on and on. If you don't experience that and at least know enough about that, I know that it helped me a lot in being a studio musician because I had to adapt to different styles and genres when I did that, you know. And
On the fly,
On the
like-
fly, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when I was in the jingle business, you know, doing commercials and stuff like that, I never knew what I was going to be asked to do until I
Sure.
showed up at the studio. It might be play with a string section, it might be play in a horn section, it might be a full big band, it might be a concert band because they're making a marching band video or something
Right.
like that. Or it might be 8 bars of a rock and roll solo, or you know, I had one guy. I was hanging out with Stan Getz. He was in town, and I got a last minute call, and he said, "Yeah, I need you to do this thing, man. It's kind of a Stan Getz kind of thing." And
You want to talk to him?
I looked at Stan. I said, "Hey, Stan, you want to do a jingle?"
So you're with the Maynard Band, and you were there for 3 years. You were the musical director, actually.
I
You
was,
ended
yeah,
up
while I was there.
becoming, huh?
Yeah.
And you did
In other
3
words,
records
if there was a
with them,
rehearsal that had to be done and Maynard couldn't be there, he was taking
You're
care of.
running it, or-
I'd run the rehearsal,
Okay.
like the day that Peter Erskine joined the band. Maynard was not there. He was doing.
Oh,
he was
really?
off doing some, you know, public relations thing, and Peter came in, and we had the rehearsal at the Maryland Hotel, which was right across from the old Happy Medium, and Peter came in and played every single chart down the first time. Every single chart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we all went out for dinner.
Yeah, that was it.
You know.
Okay,
And
done.
Maynard asked me later, said, "How'd it go?" I said, "You're gonna be a happy dude."
I did you leave the band? It was just at that point where it was like, man, 3 years is 3 years on this.
You know,
thing.
and I had met my wife.
Okay.
And my then future wife. You know, and you know,
Sleeping on a bus just
sleeping in
didn't
a
seem
bus,
like a lot
living
of
out of a
fun.
suitcase. You know, I felt like I'd probably done as much as I was going to do with that, and so this is another great story. My last day on the band, we're playing a concert at the Robin Hood Dell in Philadelphia, and it's like 33,000 people.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he used to play these huge
Yeah, it was
spaces.
us and George Benson.
Wow.
And we were both at like the height of our popularity. Maynard had Rocky.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
which was huge.
Yeah.
You know, and of course George had, you know, his
Right, all of the stuff. he was
reason
doing, yeah.
and all of that. So that was my last day on the band, you know, and I said goodbye to Maynard and stuff. And he said, you're forever going to be associated with me. You know that, don't you? And I said, I'm honored to
Yeah.
be associated with you.
Yeah.
Thank you for all that you've done and all of that. He said, well, I was really hoping that I could do a record, you know, for you. And I said, thank you anyway.
Yeah.
Next day, I got on the train in the morning. I had to take the train from Philadelphia to New York to overdub some solos on Maynard's album. It's called New Vintage.
Okay.
And so I did. I went. I was there, and Bob James was upstairs in the another studio. And he sent word down. He knew that I was there. He sent word down and asked Mark to come up, when he's done.
Did you know him at that point?
Oh yeah, because he had actually produced a couple of Maynard, co-produced a couple, the Maynard albums that I did. So he was very familiar with me, and he had written me a letter saying that one of these days we're going to do a project together. Mm-hmm. And that was like a year or two before that. So so I went upstairs and said hello and everything, and he said, I just signed this production deal with, CBS, Sony, Columbia Records, and I've got my own production company. I'd like to sign you to do, a solo album. I was just going home. I was just going to start doing my, getting back into the shows if there were any,
right?
Whatever there was to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did. We signed. I went back to New York a few weeks later, signed the contract, and we talked about personnel and some material and stuff like that, and that was it. I did 2 albums.
Wow.
For them.
Wow. You're watching Maynard Ferguson on PBS.
Yeah.
You're on the band for 3 years, and then because of him, all this other stuff. I guess you're right. I mean, you're always going to be connected to him.
He's a conduit.
Yeah, I guess so.
Even to this day, most people still know me. He played with Maynard. Which again is.
Well, so you just jumped right into it then. So then
I started working. Yeah, I recorded my first solo CD.
Are you touring on your own then?
No, I was touring with him.
Okay.
He brought me along into his band as a featured artist.
The James Gang. Bob James Gang.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of like an informal name. But it was Bob James featuring me and maybe Harvey Mason or, Earl Clue or somebody like that. So, yeah, it was in that, pop-ish jazz kind of thing. And it was great. It was great.
Fun stuff,
Bob was, a class guy. We got treated really well, first class, all the way. And, the nice thing was that we weren't out on the road for...
like Maynard.
46 weeks a year.
Yeah.
We'd go out for a month.
And then come back.
And then we'd be back. We'd be home for a month or 6 weeks. Then we'd go out for another month.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to leave all my ties and everything.
Right.
So I did that for 6 years.
Wow. Now, where were you living then? Because you weren't in Chicago yet,
I moved to Chicago the end of 1980.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my wife, when I got married in '77, my wife and I stayed in Miami until all the riots started happening. And you know what? Not just that, but the work scene dried up. All the hotels stopped bringing in those kind of acts because
switch over.
The clientele was changing.
Oh.
All the old.
Right.
People were moving further up north because they wanted to get away from.
Right.
The
crazy
influx
stuff
of all of that. And basically it was the Cubans and the Haitians, taking away jobs from blacks, and there were issues there, and there wasn't the record business in 1980 collapsed. So there wasn't anything there to keep me anymore.
Why did you come to Chicago? There was a jingle scene happening? Or
there was
just
that, and I mean, every time I visit, I was in Chicago a lot with both Bob and Maynard, and I loved it here.
Yeah.
I mean, this was the best of both worlds. Of either going to New York. I didn't want to go to California.
Yeah.
I just had no eyes to do that. So, and I went to New York to look around a little bit, because Bob was telling me, move to New York, get studio work, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I went to New York looking around. I got a wife and I got 3 small kids.
Manhattan's not a good spot.
Manhattan don't work.
There. Yeah.
Brooklyn don't work.
Yeah.
New Jersey doesn't work. So I said, you know what? I don't want to have to deal with this.
Yeah.
I'm by that time I was 30, 31. I said, if I was 20, maybe, but no.
Right.
So my wife's family was from here. I knew people here. I got the name of every contractor, jingle producer, record contractor, club date band leader, clubs, all that kind of stuff. And I started networking.
Well, and also in Chicago, I always feel, especially now. I mean, even back then, though, what is it? A 2-hour flight to New York, and you're in New York.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's not. It's like sitting on the Kennedy driving
Right.
in sometimes. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like you're in New York.
Yeah.
So it's not. It's
So
not out of the.
for recording sessions, Bob would fly me in,
Yeah.
or wherever. If we were going out on tour, they'd fly whoever. Not everybody was from New York,
Right.
So they'd fly them wherever they were from to start a tour, rehearse, for a day or two, and then take off.
Well, so when you're in Chicago now, this is
Mm-hmm.
when you're kind of like connecting. Obviously, you're doing a lot of jingle work because there was still a lot of jingle
There
work.
was a
happening.
lot at that time, yeah.
And then a lot of show bands still, a lot of one-off clubs. But are you doing your own thing as well at that
Yeah,
point? Because there's a lot of clubs.
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. No, I'm booking my own band, and actually, Frank Caruso, wonderful keyboard player, who you know, of
Yep.
course. Frank and I had a band together for I don't know, a dozen years or so,
Yeah.
and we still played together. But but we had a band. We played at the Bowls. We played at the Bop Shop. We played at
Yeah.
a bunch of different places that were around. And then I decided I wanted to do something. I wanted the music to change for me. I wanted to go back to more acoustic kind of music.
Yeah, because you're doing the rock thing and the funk thing and the jazz
yeah.
thing and the fusion thing and
Right,
everything. So you
right.
wanted to focus back into the natural sound.
I wanted there to be more subtlety in the music and more air.
Yeah.
And that
Well,
was,
and you also got to a certain point in your career where you could do that, right? Because you could call your own shots. So
Well,
it's like,
you know what?
I don't have to do all this stuff.
with all of the records that I did, I didn't feel like there was the return from some of the producers' selections and suggestions. Yeah, so I just I reached a point where I felt like I wanted to be in control.
Yeah.
Since I wasn't making a fortune.
You're making hundreds of dollars
tens
a week.
of dollars, tens of dollars, please. That I wanted to record things and with people that I really felt a kinship.
Yeah.
And this band that I have now has been together for 11 years. It's Jeremy Kahn and Eric Hochberg and Bob Rummage. And
Well, and you're writing music, playing standards, doing a lot of
we're
different
kind of like
arrangements.
doing some different things, with standards and I'm not a very prolific composer. What I do is sometimes I'll write some contrafacts. You know what a contrafact
No, I was
is?
going to ask you what that was.
Well, a contrafact. First of all, you can't copyright a set of chord changes.
Right.
You can only copyright a melody.
Right.
So
That's
if
why
you
all
like,
the,
that's why all the
jazz
beboppers,
tunes, yeah.
I mean, Bird and Diz and everybody else, they were writing tunes based on I Got Rhythm and How High the Moon and Whispering and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So so I've written some tunes like that. This new record, I'm vacillating, but about which direction I want to go in. I wanted to do a Brazilian project, and then I was thinking about doing just something a little bit different than that. And
Yeah.
I'm still formulating it.
Well, so you're teaching now at Elmhurst.
Elmhurst.
You're teaching
And-
private lessons out of your
and-
studio,
yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah.
Anywhere
And
else?
that's it. No.
No? And then everybody can get information on you at markcolby.com.
MarkColby.com has all my information.
And you're playing, I know we talked a little bit, you're playing 6 dates a month, usually at Catch
At Catch 35, yeah. I'm usually at the showcase once, and then usually another time or two with somebody else a month. I've been doing occasional weekend with Mike Smith over at Andy's. You can
Dueling saxophones.
dueling saxophones. Yeah, it's fun. Mike's wonderful.
Oh, he's the
And,
best, yeah.
I love the guys in his band, and it helps kick my ass.
So, to close this out, I appreciate you coming down here. I appreciate you being the feature interview for August. We've been talking about doing this for a long time.
Oh, my pleasure.
You've got gigs all over the place. You're doing teaching at markcolby.com to get all the information and everything.
Right, yeah.
So, last question for you. Who are some of the people you're listening to these days? Whether they're old or young, doesn't matter. Just what's on your playlist?
Boy, there's a lot of things. I've been listening to Walter Smith III. He's got an album called Tweel. Yeah, Joshua Redman is on a couple of cuts of that. Sounds really, really good.
He's really matured. You
Yes.
hear him over the
Yes.
past 30 years. He's
Yeah.
somebody that's really matured.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite guys to listen to still is Joe Lovano. I love Chris Potter. I love Seamus Blake. And gosh, there are a lot of the young, and they're not young. Those guys are in their 40s,
40s, 50s, yeah,
you know,
60s.
I mean, that's just a generation or so before me. But young cats, I mean, there are some guys here in town that are just scary.
Yeah.
Just scary.
But I think that, like, if we're talking about Chris Potter or Josh Redman or somebody like that, don't you think as a jazz saxophonist or a jazz player in general, you don't really get to your refinement until you get into your late 30s and 40s? I mean, you can
Absolutely.
be smoking, you can do everything, but
Right.
when you really start getting there, right?
Right, absolutely, and start developing your own voice.
Yeah.
One of the things was I wanted to listen to everybody, but I didn't want to sound just like somebody.
Right.
I wanted to kind of synergize the things that I liked about different people's playing and kind of mix it up and have it come out me,
Yeah.
you know.
And that it takes a long time to do that.
I think it does, yeah. Anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe Lovano wasn't Joe Lovano until he was
No.
in his late 30s, really.
Right. Well, I mean,
You know.
I by the time he got into his late 40s and 50s is when it really is sound and his whole concept. I think your concept continuously changes, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate
Yeah,
you
man.
coming down. And of course, thanks for watching, and check out everything at ChicagoJazzMagazine.com.